While waiting for my daughter to finish school, a parent turned to me and asked, "Did your ex-husband have a beard?" I giggled nervously. Yeah, why? No, 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 no," she suddenly screamed while walking as far away from me as possible. I just laughed because moms can be so weird sometimes. But the next day, my daughter came home from school crying. Mommy Leah said her mom said she can't talk to me anymore. Leah was her best friend. I immediately took out my phone and texted her mom asking if everything was okay. No response. I texted Amelie's mom, one of the other girls in her trio. Still nothing. I had just managed to calm my baby girl down when the pizza arrived. Usually our delivery guy is the Yapatron 5000, but tonight he just set the box on my doorstep and practically ran away. "George, you forgot your tip," I yelled, waving a 20. He just kept going. The next few days were insane. At my daughter's soccer practice, Helen saw me walking towards her and held her phone to her ear. No one had even called her. "Helen? What's going on?" She mouthed sorry and walked faster. We used to complain about our husbands together. Parents were whispering and showing each other something on their phones. When I walked by, they'd quickly put them away. By Thursday, my daughter was refusing to go to school. They moved my desk away from everyone else. The teacher said it was for space reasons, but there's like 10 feet between me and Leah now. I tried to bring her to the hairdresser to cheer her up, but when the woman saw me coming, she closed early. No apology, just flipped the sign and pulled the blinds. My phone buzzed. It was my landlord. Heard what happened. So sorry. Rent can wait this month. This was the same man who charged me a $50 inconvenience fee when I paid rent at 12:01 a.m. instead of midnight. Then the birthday party. Amelie's sleepover. My daughter found out that everyone was invited except her. She was having such a bad panic attack that I had to call a hospital. "Mom, what did I do?" Amelie's my best friend. Enough was enough. I called the school office. "Something is happening to my daughter. She's being systematically excluded and I need answers right now." The counselor called back within an hour, but her voice was off, like she was choosing every word carefully. "Mrs. Callahan, we just wanted to check in about your home environment. Is everything safe? Anyone new spending time around your daughter?" "What? What are you even asking me? I think it's best if we discuss this in person. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" "No. You'll tell me right now why my daughter is being tortured." Long pause. "The principal will explain everything tomorrow." Beep. She hung up. Then at 11 p.m., an email from my gym. Membership terminated. Effective immediately. I'd been going there for 5 years. The owner knew me by name. I was trying to figure out what to do when my daughter crawled into my bed at 2 a.m. sobbing. "Mommy, am I ugly?" It took everything in me not to burst into tears. The lunch lady wouldn't look at me today. She just pointed at my tray. I finally caved. On Saturday morning, I found myself walking towards the principal's office while being escorted by a security guard. Other parents there for Saturday sports pulled their kids against the walls as we passed. One mom literally shielded her son with her body, like we were dangerous. In his office, the principal locked the door behind us. The click was so loud in the silence. He walked to the windows and twisted the blinds shut. My daughter grabbed my hand tighter. "Please, sit down. I'll stand. What is this about?" He sat at his desk, fingers hovering over his keyboard, then pulled them back. "Mr. Griffin, you're scaring me." "Mrs. Callahan." He was looking at his screen, not at me. "When did you last speak to your ex-husband?" "Christmas. Why? And you haven't? Been in contact since then? No communication at all?" "No. We exchanged texts about pickup times maybe once a month. What does this have to do with anything?" He turned his monitor slightly, then back, like he was debating something. "Some information has come to our attention. About your former husband. The parents. What information? What are you talking about? I need to show you something, but I want you to prepare yourself." My legs felt weak. I sat down, pulling my daughter onto my lap. "It's from 2 weeks ago. The parents have been..." He paused. "They've been very concerned." He finally turned the screen toward me. Local news website. The headline hit me first, then his face. My ex-husband's face in a mugshot. The words above the photo made my stomach drop, and I grabbed the desk edge to keep from falling as the headline burned into my brain reading, "Local man arrested in multi-state child exploitation ring," and everything in the room started spinning. The principal's hand shot out to steady my arm as my knees buckled and I sank into the chair, pulling my daughter tight against me, while the screen showed my ex-husband's face staring back at us. The principal started talking fast about how parents found this article online and had been sharing it in some private Facebook group for the past 2 weeks, spreading it to everyone in the school community. My daughter tugged on my sleeve and pointed at the screen asking why Daddy's picture was on the computer, and I couldn't make any words come out while the principal kept scrolling through screenshots of parent comments. He cleared his throat and said he understood this wasn't my fault, but parents were demanding the school take action to protect their children from any potential risk. Several families had already threatened to pull their kids from the school if my daughter remained enrolled, and the board was getting bombarded with calls demanding we be removed immediately. I forced myself to look at him and asked what exactly my ex had done, and he slid a printed article across the desk with his finger pointing to the charges section. The paper showed possession and distribution charges involving minors, and my stomach churned as I read the details, and suddenly understood why everyone had been avoiding us, like we had some disease. The principal stood up and suggested we leave through the back entrance since parents were already gathering for Saturday morning sports drop-off, and he didn't want us walking through that crowd. My daughter kept asking what was happening as he led us down an empty hallway past the janitor's closet and through a door marked "Staff Only" that opened to the back parking lot. She didn't understand why we were sneaking around and kept saying we didn't do anything wrong while I fumbled with my car keys and tried to get us out of there as fast as possible. The drive home took forever with my daughter asking questions I couldn't answer and my hands shaking, so bad I could barely grip the steering wheel. The second we got inside, I ran to my laptop and started searching online, finding 3 more articles about the arrest from 2 months ago that I'd somehow completely missed. Each article mentioned he was caught in a federal sting operation with 20 other suspects across multiple states, and the investigation had been going on for over a year. The details made me sick as I read about encrypted files and dark web forums and how they'd tracked him through his work computer at 3 different locations. My coworker had mentioned Kenneth Levitt was a good family lawyer, so I grabbed my phone and dialed his number, leaving a desperate voicemail explaining the situation and begging him to call me back. My daughter sat on the couch watching me pace around the living room and asked when she could go back to the school and see Leah again, like everything would just go back to normal. Within an hour, my phone rang and Kenneth's calm voice said he could see us for an emergency consultation that afternoon at 3 o'clock. He explained we needed to act fast to protect both my custody rights and my daughter's educational access before things got worse with the school district and other parents. I was writing down his office address when the doorbell rang, and I looked through the peephole to see Helen from soccer standing at the bottom of my stairs holding a plastic bag. She wouldn't come any closer when I opened the door and just stood there looking at the ground saying she was sorry, but her husband didn't want their son around my daughter anymore. She held out the bag containing my daughter's soccer gear that she'd left at practice and backed away before I could even respond to what she was saying. My daughter had come to the window and watched Helen practically run back to her car and drive away without looking back at our apartment. She turned to me with tears in her eyes, asking if this was all because of Daddy's picture on the computer, and I didn't know how to explain something I barely understood myself. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of phone calls and internet searches trying to piece together what had happened while my daughter sat quietly coloring at the kitchen table. Every article I found had more awful details about the investigation, and I kept having to close my laptop when she walked by so she wouldn't see the headlines. Kenneth's office was in a building downtown, and we had to circle the block 3 times to find parking, while my daughter complained she was hungry and wanted to go home. The waiting room had old magazines and a water cooler that made gurgling sounds while we sat on plastic chairs waiting for him to call us back. Kenneth opened his office door and waved us in past a wall covered in law degrees and family photos, while my daughter dragged her feet behind me looking scared. His office had leather chairs and a big wooden desk with neat stacks of papers, and he pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing down everything I told him about the arrest and the Facebook posts and the school situation. He typed something on his computer and turned the screen toward me, showing the actual arrest records from the federal database with charges that made my stomach turn, while my daughter played with a stress ball from his desk. The bail conditions were listed right there in black and white, including mandatory disclosure to any co-parents within 48 hours of release, which my ex had completely ignored during our last custody exchange 3 weeks ago. Kenneth explained this violation alone was enough for emergency custody, and started printing forms while telling me the court would take this seriously, given the nature of the crimes, and the fact my ex had hidden it from me. We spent the next hour filling out paperwork for sole custody, and a restraining order with Kenneth asking detailed questions about our custody schedule, and any recent concerning behavior while my daughter colored with markers he kept for young clients. He filed everything electronically right there, and scheduled an emergency hearing for next week, saying judges usually acted fast when kids were potentially at risk, and bail conditions had been violated. The drive home felt surreal with all these legal documents in my bag, and my daughter asking if Daddy was going to jail while I tried to explain things in a way that wouldn't scare her more. That evening while making dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. And when I opened it, there was a screenshot of a Facebook post from some parent group calling me an enabler, who must have known what my ex was doing. The post had over 50 comments with people saying horrible things about me, and 300 angry reactions from parents I'd never even met, who were spreading lies about our family. I stayed up until 3 a.m. after my daughter went to bed searching every article about the charges, and found out my ex had been using work computers at 3 different locations over the past 2 years to access illegal content. The investigation had started when IT found suspicious files during routine maintenance at his main office, and they'd called the FBI, who then discovered he'd been doing the same thing at 2 client sites he visited regularly. Reading the details made me physically sick, and I had to run to the bathroom twice while trying to understand how the man I'd been married to for 8 years could have been living this double life. The next morning, while my daughter ate breakfast, my phone rang, and it was Winifred Thornton from the school counseling office saying she needed to schedule a safety assessment meeting as soon as possible. Her voice was kind but professional, as she explained this was standard protocol when situations like this came up, and she wanted to help us navigate the school environment while everything was happening. We met that afternoon in her small office filled with stuffed animals and inspirational posters, while my daughter waited outside with the secretary doing a puzzle. Winifred closed the door and immediately told me she'd been fielding calls from panicked parents all week, demanding my daughter be removed from the school, or at least separated from their children during all activities. She said she'd been pushing back hard, but needed documentation from me to support her position that we weren't a threat, and my daughter deserved to stay in her regular classroom. I handed her the emergency custody filing Kenneth had given me copies of, and watched her read through it carefully, making notes about the bail violation and the restraining order we'd filed. She called my daughter in and gently asked about her experiences at the school, while I sat there trying not to cry as my baby described kids moving away from her at lunch and parents pulling their children away at pickup. Winifred took detailed notes about each incident and promised she would address the bullying immediately with teachers and implement a safety plan that didn't isolate my daughter further. I explained I had no knowledge of my ex's activities, and showed her text messages proving our limited contact was only about pickup schedules and nothing else. She believed me but warned that parent fear often overrode logic in these situations, and some families might never come around no matter what evidence we provided. 2 days later, I was folding laundry when a knock at the door made me jump, and through the peephole I saw a man in a polo shirt holding a clipboard with an official badge hanging from his neck. He introduced himself as Darren Phillips from CPS, and explained someone had made an anonymous report alleging I was endangering my child by exposing her to a known predator. My hands shook as I invited him in, knowing I had nothing to hide but terrified of what this meant for us with everything else already falling apart. He walked through our apartment, taking notes about the locks on the doors, and the food in the fridge, and the general living conditions, while my daughter watched from her bedroom doorway. He asked to speak with her privately, and I had to sit in the kitchen listening to her small voice from the living room, explaining that Mommy didn't do anything bad, but everyone at the school hated us now, and she didn't understand why. Darren asked her about our daily routine and who came to visit and if she felt safe at home while I gripped my coffee mug, so hard I thought it might break. After 40 minutes, he came back to the kitchen and said he could see this was a case of community hysteria, but he still had to complete the full investigation, which would take several weeks with multiple visits. Darren closed his notebook and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. The report claimed you knew about the charges against your ex and were still letting him have contact with your daughter. My stomach dropped. That's not true. I had no idea about any of this until today. He nodded and made another note. I can see that, but I still have to keep the case open until after your custody hearing. He stood up and handed me his card. Call if you need anything. After he left, I called Kenneth immediately, and he told me to come to his office right away. I drove there with my daughter playing games on my phone in the back seat. Kenneth was waiting with a stack of papers when we arrived. I pulled the court records and your ex was released on bail 3 weeks ago. He showed me the conditions, which included no contact with any minors. He never told you during your last text exchange about pickup times? I shook my head feeling sick. This is crucial evidence for us. He made copies of everything, including our text messages from the past month. That night, my daughter woke up screaming at 3 a.m. She was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Everyone at the school disappeared when I walked by in my dream. I held her tight while she shook. What did I do to make everyone hate me, Mommy? I didn't have an answer that would help. The next morning, Kenneth called early. I'm filing a formal notice with the school district about the harassment your daughter is facing. He listed every incident we'd documented. They have to intervene to protect her educational rights. 2 hours later, the principal called saying the district wanted an emergency meeting. I dropped my daughter at the counselor's office and walked into a conference room full of suits. 3 administrators sat across from me looking nervous. The woman in the middle started talking about liability and safety protocols. We think it's best if your daughter has supervised transitions between classes and eats lunch in the counselor's office. I stood up so fast my chair fell over. You want to punish her more by isolating her from everyone? They looked at each other nervously. It's for her protection. I slammed my hand on the table. She stays in regular classes with support, or I'm calling my lawyer right now. The principal cleared his throat. We can do modified arrangements with Winifred checking in throughout the day. I sat back down. Fine, but no more isolation. When we got home, my daughter was quiet until bedtime. Then she pulled out her tablet and showed me a TikTok video. Someone had taken her school photo and put text over it calling her dad a predator. The video had 12,000 views. Comments were saying horrible things about our whole family. Some said I must have known. Others said my daughter would probably grow up the same way. I took screenshots of everything while she cried into her pillow. I reported the video on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, everywhere it had been shared. Each platform had different reporting processes, and I had to fill out forms explaining why it was harmful. Hours passed as I documented every comment and username. Kenneth answered his phone at 10 p.m. when I called. This is cyberbullying and we're adding it to our legal file. He told me to keep documenting everything. The next morning, someone knocked on our door. Through the peephole, I saw Frank from 2 doors down holding a dish. I opened the door carefully. Made too much lasagna and thought you might want some. He set it on my counter. Not everyone believes the rumors you know. He told me his brother was falsely accused of something similar years ago. People can be real cruel when they're scared. He patted my shoulder and left before I could even thank him properly. That afternoon, Kenneth called with news. The emergency custody hearing is scheduled for next week. He wanted to meet to prepare me for questions. The judge will want to know about your ex's deception and the bail violation. We spent 3 hours going over potential questions in his office. Tell the truth and stay calm no matter what they ask. He showed me similar cases where the non-offending parent got full custody. Given the evidence and his failure to disclose, I'm confident the judge will rule in our favor. My daughter sat in the waiting room doing homework while we talked. On the drive home, she asked if Daddy would be at the hearing. No, baby, just Mommy and the lawyers. She nodded and went back to her tablet. That night, I couldn't sleep thinking about everything that had happened in just 2 weeks. My daughter's entire world had been destroyed because of something she didn't even understand. The next day at pickup, I saw parents whispering and pointing again. One mom pulled her son away when my daughter walked past, but then Winifred appeared and walked my daughter to my car personally. She had a better day today. My daughter actually smiled a little on the ride home. She'd painted a picture of a rainbow in art class. Small progress, but it was something. Kenneth texted that night saying he'd filed additional motions about the harassment. The school would have to respond formally now. Everything was documented and ready for court. 3 days later at pickup, I was standing by my car when I noticed Imogen Stewart walking toward me holding my daughter's hand. The art teacher bent close to my ear and whispered that my daughter could eat lunch in her room if she needed somewhere quiet. My daughter's face actually lit up for the first time in weeks. The next day, she came home carrying a canvas covered in bright yellow and orange paint. She explained how Imogen taught her about warm colors making people feel happy. For the rest of the week, she ate lunch in the art room, learning to mix colors and paint flowers. She stopped crying at bedtime and started talking about painting techniques instead. I decided to write an email to the parent list explaining that my daughter and I were victims too. I kept it factual and short, just stating that we had no knowledge of my ex's crimes. Within 2 hours, someone forwarded it to the Facebook group with a comment calling me a liar. More parents piled on, saying I must have known something was wrong. The comments got worse with each refresh until I had to close my laptop. Kenneth called the next morning saying the emergency custody hearing was scheduled for that afternoon. The courtroom was small and cold with just me, Kenneth, and my ex's lawyer present. The judge reviewed the arrest records and bail violation documentation Kenneth had filed. She asked me a few questions about when I last knew my ex's location. Within 20 minutes, she granted me full emergency custody and a restraining order. Kenneth shook my hand outside, calling it a clear victory, but I just felt tired. The restraining order meant my ex couldn't come within 500 feet of us. That same evening, the principal emailed me a petition some parents had started. They wanted my daughter transferred to another district for everyone's safety. The principal apologized, saying he had to document everything for legal reasons. Over 40 parents had already signed it, demanding immediate action. My daughter was doing homework when she overheard two moms talking at pickup the next day. They were saying Helen started the Facebook group right after seeing the news article. The betrayal hit me hard since Helen had smiled at me for weeks while spreading rumors. She knew what she was doing the whole time and kept pretending to be sorry. I saw Helen at the grocery store that weekend near the produce section. I walked straight up to her and calmly told her she was destroying an innocent child. She stammered something about just trying to protect the kids from danger. I told her she'd ruined my daughter's life and walked away while she called after me. Her weak apologies followed me all the way to the parking lot. Monday morning, I opened my apartment door to get the newspaper and saw red spray paint. Someone had written, "Protect our kids," across our door in huge letters. I took photos from every angle, then called the police to file a report. The officer who came seemed sympathetic, but said without security cameras there wasn't much they could do. He took my statement and gave me a case number for insurance. Kenneth came over that afternoon with a security camera kit from the hardware store. We spent 3 hours installing it above my door and setting up the recording system. He mentioned we might have grounds to sue several parents for defamation and harassment. He wanted to document everything in case we decided to pursue civil action later. The camera would help prove any future incidents that happened at our door. 2 days later, Darren from CPS knocked on my door with a folder in his hand. He smiled and said he had good news about closing our investigation completely. They found no concerns whatsoever about my parenting or home environment. He sat at my kitchen table filling out the final paperwork while my daughter watched TV. He mentioned he'd rarely seen such a clear case of community hysteria hurting innocent people. The anonymous report had been baseless and probably came from a parent at the school. He wished us luck and said he hoped things would get better soon. That night, I made my daughter's favorite spaghetti and we ate together in silence. She asked if the bad stuff would ever stop happening to us. I told her it would get better, even though I wasn't sure myself. The next morning, Imogen called and said she'd found an online art group for kids that might help my daughter connect with someone new. I signed her up that afternoon and watched her type nervously in the chat about her favorite colors and drawing styles. Within an hour, she was video chatting with a girl named Sophie from 3 states away, who loved anime just as much as she did. They spent 2 hours drawing characters together while I sat in the kitchen trying not to cry at the sound of her actual laughter. Sophie didn't know anything about our situation, and treated my daughter like a normal kid, which was exactly what she needed. The school district sent out a mass email that evening about their zero-tolerance policy for bullying, and reminded parents about the dangers of spreading unverified information on social media. My inbox immediately filled with reply-all messages from parents defending their actions and saying the school should focus on protecting children from real threats instead of lecturing them. Helen's response was the longest, and mentioned how parents have a right to know about potential dangers in their community. I deleted them all without responding, and focused on helping my daughter with her math homework. Kenneth called the next day to schedule a meeting about preparing for my ex's criminal trial, in case I had to testify. We met at his office where he walked me through potential questions the prosecutor might ask about our marriage and custody arrangements. He had me practice staying calm while describing difficult details about discovering the charges and how it affected our daughter. My hands shook the whole time, but Kenneth said that was normal, and judges expect witnesses to be nervous. He gave me breathing exercises to use if I felt overwhelmed on the stand. 3 days later, the family court judge signed the final custody order giving me sole legal and physical custody, with my ex losing all parental rights. The paperwork said his rights were terminated pending the outcome of his criminal case, but Kenneth explained that meant permanently in practice. My daughter was in the living room when I got home, and I told her daddy wouldn't be visiting anymore, which she seemed to understand even if she didn't know all the reasons. She just nodded and went back to drawing with Sophie on her tablet. Monday morning brought a small surprise when my daughter came home saying her desk had been moved closer to the other kids again. The teacher said it was part of a new seating arrangement, but my daughter knew it meant things were getting slightly better. She could actually hear what the other kids were saying during group work now, instead of being isolated in the corner. At recess on Wednesday, something amazing happened that my daughter couldn't stop talking about. Leia had waved at her when no adults were watching near the swings. It was quick, and Leah looked around first to make sure no parents saw, but she definitely waved and even smiled a little. My daughter spent the entire evening drawing a picture of 2 girls on swings to give to Leah if she ever got the chance. Thursday's local newspaper had an opinion piece about mob mentality and rush to judgment in the digital age that didn't mention us by name, but was clearly about our situation. The writer talked about how social media can destroy innocent people before facts are known and questioned whether protecting children requires hurting other children in the process. My phone buzzed with 3 apology texts from parents who recognized themselves in the article, though none of them offered to actually do anything to help. Friday afternoon, I got an unexpected message from someone named Marisa, who said she was another single mom whose family went through something similar last year. Her ex had been falsely accused of dealing drugs, and the whole school turned against them for months until the truth came out. She offered to meet for coffee and share what helped them survive the isolation and rumors. I agreed immediately because I desperately needed to talk to someone who actually understood what we were going through. We met at a small cafe downtown, where Marisa told me about keeping detailed records of everything and finding activities outside the school community for her son. She said the worst part was watching her child lose friends over something that wasn't even true, but that some families eventually came around once the panic died down. The following Tuesday, Darren from CPS knocked on my door with final paperwork officially closing our case with no findings of concern. He sat at my kitchen table filling out forms and mentioned quietly that whoever made the anonymous report should be ashamed of themselves for weaponizing child services against an innocent family. He wished us well and said he'd seen too many cases where community hysteria hurt the very children people claim to be protecting. My daughter had soccer practice that afternoon, and I almost didn't take her because the previous weeks had been so awful with kids refusing to pass to her. But she wanted to try again, so we went, and I sat on the bleachers away from the other parents as usual. 20 minutes into practice, something shifted when the coach pulled the team aside for what looked like a serious talk. When they went back to scrimmaging, my daughter actually got past the ball for the first time in over a month. She was so surprised she almost missed it, but managed to control it and dribble toward the goal. The goalie barely tried to stop her, and she scored while the coach clapped and shouted encouragement. She ran back to position with the biggest smile I'd seen in weeks, and even got a quick high five from one teammate when parents weren't looking. 3 days later, the mail carrier knocked instead of just leaving stuff in the box and handed me a thick envelope that required a signature. I opened it right there on the porch and saw the official court seal at the top with the words, "Subpoena to testify," and my ex's case number underneath. The paper said I had to appear as a witness in federal court in 3 months and listed penalties for not showing up, including arrest and fines. My hands shook as I read through the legal language, trying to understand what they wanted from me, since I hadn't been part of whatever he did. The reality hit me that this nightmare would drag on for months more with court appearances and testimony about our marriage and his access to our daughter. I called Kenneth immediately, and he said this was expected since I was the ex-spouse, and might have information about his activities or computer use during our marriage. 2 days later, I sat in a conference room at the district attorney's office while a prosecutor explained what would happen at trial. She spread out papers showing me the types of questions they'd ask, which were mostly about custody schedules, and whether he ever had unsupervised time with our daughter or her friends. She promised they wouldn't make my daughter testify, and would only mention her in basic custody facts, without using her name in court. The prosecutor said my testimony would be brief and focused on establishing timeline facts about our divorce and his visitation rights. She gave me her card and said to call if I remembered anything unusual about his behavior with children during our marriage. That same week at soccer practice, I noticed the coach had put up new signs about parent conduct on the sidelines, with rules about maintaining appropriate distance, and no negative comments about any child. He walked the sideline before practice started telling parents about the new policy, and how anyone violating it would be asked to leave immediately. During the game, when 2 moms started whispering and pointing in our direction, the coach walked over and told them to focus on the game or move to their cars. They looked shocked but stopped talking, and one even gave me an apologetic look later. The next morning, a certified letter arrived from our landlord saying he was not renewing our lease due to multiple violations, including excessive noise and unauthorized occupants. I knew it was lies since we were the quietest tenants in the building and never had anyone stay over, but Kenneth said fighting it would take months in housing court. He called the landlord's attorney and negotiated a deal where we'd leave voluntarily in 60 days if they provided a neutral reference letter for our next apartment. It felt like giving up, but Kenneth said sometimes strategic retreat was better than a long fight that would drain our energy and money. We spent the next 2 weeks looking at apartments in the same school district so my daughter wouldn't have to change schools on top of everything else. Most landlords did background checks that showed the media coverage and suddenly had no vacancies, but Kenneth found one through a client who owned several buildings. The new place was smaller and more expensive, but the landlord agreed to rent to us after Kenneth personally vouched for us and explained the situation. My daughter helped pack our things and surprised me by wanting to donate most of her toys to charity. She kept her art supplies and all the paintings she'd made with Imogen during those lonely lunch periods, but said the other stuff reminded her of when friends used to come over. We filled 6 boxes for donation, and she seemed lighter somehow after deciding what to keep and what to let go. Moving day came and Frank showed up with his truck even though I hadn't asked for help. He loaded boxes while other neighbors watched from their windows and a few kids stared from the playground. My daughter walked through our old apartment one last time and stopped at the front door where we'd painted over the hateful graffiti. She touched the spot gently and said goodbye to the door like it was a friend who'd protected us. The new apartment was on the 3rd floor with big windows and hardwood floors that creaked when you walked. My daughter picked the smaller bedroom because it had better light for painting, and immediately started planning where to hang her artwork. She measured the walls with her hands, and decided which paintings would go where while I unpacked kitchen boxes. The place was quieter than our old building with no shared walls and nobody above or below us. That weekend, she asked if her online art friend could meet her in person since they'd been video chatting for weeks about drawings. I was nervous, but agreed to a meeting at the ice cream shop downtown, where I could watch from a nearby table. The other girl was exactly as described, with purple streaks in her hair and paint under her fingernails. They hugged like old friends and spent 2 hours giggling over sundaes and showing each other sketchbooks. Watching my daughter laugh with someone her own age who didn't know our story felt like witnessing something precious and rare. A few days later at the park near our new apartment, I pushed my daughter on the swings while she practiced pumping her legs to go higher. Another mom sat on the bench watching her daughter on the monkey bars, and we started talking about how fast kids grow. She mentioned her daughter was struggling with reading and asked if I knew any good tutors in the area. I told her I used to help in my daughter's classroom before everything happened and offered to work with her daughter for free just to help out. She smiled and handed me her phone to put in my number without asking my last name or Googling me first. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was sorting through boxes in our new place, and Kenneth's name showed on the screen. He told me my ex had taken a plea deal that morning for 5 years in federal prison with no chance of early release. My hand shook as I set down the box of kitchen stuff I'd been unpacking. Kenneth explained the deal meant no trial and no testimony from me, which was good news, but also meant my daughter would never get answers about why her dad did what he did. I hung up and stood there in our half-unpacked living room, feeling both relief that he couldn't hurt anyone else, and sadness for the father my daughter had lost forever. That night, I went through my phone and deleted Facebook completely, along with all the news alert apps that had been sending me updates about the case for weeks. The constant notifications about new developments and parent comments had been keeping us stuck in crisis mode when we needed to move forward. I turned off Google Alerts too and decided we'd control what information came into our lives from now on, instead of letting it bombard us randomly. My daughter came home from the school the next day and told me a kid had asked about her dad at recess. She used the exact phrase Winifred had taught her, saying it was private family business, and she didn't want to talk about it. The kid had shrugged and asked if she wanted to play tetherball instead. She practiced those phrases in the mirror sometimes, and each time she used them at the school, it got easier to protect herself while still being open to making friends. 2 weeks before school ended, I sat in the principal's office for our end-of-year meeting, and he admitted he could have handled everything better from the start. He pushed a folder across his desk with information about resources for next year, including a peer mentor program, where an older student would help my daughter navigate social situations. He also mentioned they were changing their policies about how they handled parent concerns after what happened to us. I nodded and took the folder, but didn't say much because what was done was done. On the last day of school, my daughter burst through our apartment door holding her yearbook and showing me 3 signatures she'd gotten. One was from Imogen with a note about art camp, another from a girl in her math class, and the third one made her smile biggest because it was from Leah, who had written, "Have a good summer," with a little heart. It wasn't much compared to the pages of signatures she used to get, but it was more than we'd had 2 months ago, and that meant something. That weekend, I went through our photos and separated them into 2 groups. The good memories went into a photo album I kept on the bookshelf where my daughter could look through them whenever she wanted. The painful ones, including articles about the arrest and screenshots of the cruel messages, went into a box I stored in my closet for when she was older and had questions. For now, we'd focus on moving forward, not looking back at what we'd lost. I signed her up for summer activities, including therapy twice a week, with a counselor who specialized in helping kids process trauma. Imogen had recommended an art camp that ran mornings at the community center, and my daughter was excited about spending 2 weeks painting and drawing with other kids who loved art. I also found a soccer league at the rec center across town, where nobody knew our story, and she could just be a regular kid playing a sport she loved. Small steps toward normal, but they were steps in the right direction. On our first Friday in June, we ordered pizza and ate it on our new balcony while the sun went down over the buildings. My daughter had set up her easel in the corner and was adding finishing touches to a painting she'd been working on all week. She turned it around to show me, and I saw a girl standing tall in the middle of a storm with rain and wind all around her, but she wasn't bending or breaking. The girl's face was calm and her feet were planted firm on the ground while everything swirled around her. My daughter explained she'd painted it during art therapy, and it showed how she felt now compared to 2 months ago when everything first happened. We sat there eating our pizza and watching the sky turn orange and pink while she told me about the new techniques Imogen had taught her for showing movement in paintings. Tonight, there was no crying about lost friends or asking why people hated us. No fear about tomorrow or what people might say. Just us on our little balcony with pizza and paint, and the quiet understanding that we were rebuilding our life one moment at a time. Wow. Thanks for hanging out with me through all these questions and wonderings today. I had a lot of fun just sharing this time with you all and seeing where it went. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.